Hey everybody, welcome to Charts with Dan. I'm your host, Dan Murrell, and for everyone who joined me on my trip last week to the year 1999, welcome back to present day. I know it was something a little bit different for the show, but we are back to business as usual this week, even though the box office is not yet back to business as usual. So let's look at the top 5 for this past weekend, which as of right now is the top 2. Because there are only 2 films reporting as of right now, as of taping this show for this weekend. Perhaps it is because it is a 4-day weekend and we are in the middle of the Memorial Day weekend. Usually I would wait to do this show until Tuesday, but I don't really think there's going to be any huge game changers between today and tomorrow, so I'm doing it on the Monday of Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S. The number 1 film yet again is The Wretched. The Wretched has been number 1 for a few weeks now. It is also, that's largely because its theater count is growing. It's now playing in 59 theaters nationwide. So when you're looking at the grosses for The Wretched, the per theater average is actually going down, meaning it's making less money per theater, but the number of theaters showing it is growing, which is why the revenue has been growing week over week for The Wretched, and why you see those numbers go up. And that's largely due to the fact that we are starting to see a lot of drive-in theaters reopening. We're seeing some brick and mortar theaters reopening in states where that's allowed, but that is a much, much slower process, and in many states we are not at that point of recovery yet. So a lot of this, if not most of it, is driven from drive-in theater numbers. There have been some that were open nationwide. We talked about the Ocala Theater in Florida. There are a few in California. There are now many more nationwide that are starting to open as restrictions are loosening here around Memorial Day weekend. So The Wretched, the number 1 film yet again, its theatrical gross is actually right around $500,000, $500,000, which, considering the fact that this was a VOD simultaneous release, as far as box office numbers go, this is almost certainly better than The Wretched would have done in a marketplace where movies were coming out from big studios. It would not have gotten the screens that it's getting, and it certainly, I don't think, would have gotten the theatrical grosses that it's getting. So there are these little tiny weird asterisks and success stories in the midst of this crisis, and one of them is The Wretched, which is going to see a much bigger return on its theatrical distribution, certainly, than I think it ever would have thought it would, because it is one of the very few new films that are available for theaters to show. It's still being programmed, and it is the number 1 movie. The only movie right now on Monday, as we're taping the show, that has reported grosses is a film called We Summon the Darkness. That comes in at number 2, playing in 10 theaters nationwide. And again, the research that I found, most, if not all, of this revenue is coming from drive-in theaters. I found that it was playing at 1 drive-in in Iowa. There are 4 drive-in theaters in Ohio that are playing the film. This is premiered in Fantastic Fest in 2019. Alexandra Daddario, Johnny Knoxville, just 2 of the cast members. But another movie that is benefiting from the fact that there are a lot of drive-in theaters that are looking for new movies to play. A lot of them are playing movies that have already come out this year. Some of them are playing library content, older films. But these new, smaller, independent films are really benefiting from the fact that these drive-ins and other theaters are looking to stock their screens with new films. So those are the 2 films that are reporting numbers as of right now. That number may go up depending on who reports box office figures for the long Memorial Day weekend. But it brings up a bigger question, and something that I've started wondering about, which is that more and more theaters are starting to relax restrictions, particularly drive-in theaters, where it's easier to enforce social distancing. It's easier to keep people apart because you're in your car already. And as I mentioned, different states are at different stages of recovery, but we are starting to see some theaters reopen. It is very likely in the coming weeks that other theaters will be given the okay to reopen, although many of them, the big chains like your AMCs, etc., have said that they will not be reopening until there are new films to show. But one of the first things that happened in the midst of this pandemic was that as it spread here in the United States, studios stopped reporting box office numbers. And I talk about this just about every week, but when I say that The Wretched is the number 1 film of the weekend, it's not because it was the movie that people went to see the most necessarily. It's because the studios, the large studios, have all stopped reporting box office grosses. That's how those numbers are generated. Box office numbers are reported by the studios. They gather that data, they report those numbers, which are then compiled and reported on by folks like me, a lot of folks, Scott Mendelson at Forbes. There are a lot of great box office analysts out there who use these numbers to make their box office reporting. I think that we are at a point now where, as theaters start to reopen and as we start seeing more films gain traction in these small theaters that are open, I'm hopeful that very soon we will see studios begin to report box office numbers again. And I understand why they stopped. They stopped because as theater attendance dropped, as theaters started closing, to see their films next to these very low figures, these very low attendance numbers, it's shocking. It really is. And it's still shocking to see the fact that I have 2 movies in the top 5 this weekend. I've had movies that were in the top 5 with $30 grosses nationwide. I think a lot of that shock has worn off. And as we go back to some semblance of a resumption of a life, not even a normal life, but a life outside our homes, a good step in that process would be for studios to go back and start reporting things like the Trolls World Tour, for instance, was not just a VOD film. That film has been in whatever theaters it can play in for many weeks now. And as a matter of fact, I've been reading some articles that as we're talking about The Wretched being the #1 film of the weekend for these past several weeks, it very likely is and has been Trolls World Tour, as well as other films like The Invisible Man, which came out earlier this year, Bloodshot, which came out earlier this year. A lot of these films have been playing and are now playing on even bigger, more screens nationwide, to audiences that are very small. And yes, those figures are going to be very small, but I think these are numbers that would be interesting to have, to see what was the theatrical business actually doing during all of these weeks where they weren't reporting numbers. And I hope that they're still able to gather and collect those numbers. I think it's time for the studios to meet and to collaborate and to figure out a way to start box office reporting again. And it's not just because I'm a box office guy and I'm sitting here with not much to do. You know me and numbers and charts. I can figure out stuff to do and have been for many weeks and probably will be for many more weeks. But it's the small signs that help people realize that we're at least making incremental progress, and we can't get there until it's safe. And that's the #1 question that's floating around as we talk about Tenet, these movies that are now less than 2 months away from being open, perhaps. We need to, of course, always prioritize safety, but I think it's also important to give people these indications and these signs that we are starting to move forward, that we are starting to do things in a safe way. And I think a great way for studios to start doing that would be to go back and start reporting some of these figures, because even though they're not putting movies out yet, I think it sends a signal to the audience, to those that follow the box office, and it would be picked up in the reporting as well, that the movie business is doing its best to return to business, to doing business. So my hope is that in the weeks to come, that we see the studios begin to report numbers leading up to the release of new films, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But as with everything that with this crisis, as it has unfolded in the first days and then weeks and now months, we're just going to have to wait and see. So there are some numbers that we can talk about, and we've been breaking them down on different services. Scoob was the big story for the last charts episode that I did that was not in 1999. That movie was released on premium VOD, so it tops the charts and pretty much all the ones that are selling films. So let's look at a few of the different ones. First of all, let's look at iTunes. Scoob is at the top of the iTunes charts. Now, iTunes does not, when it's reporting, does not differentiate necessarily what is a rental and what is a purchase. We just know that Scoob is at the top of the iTunes charts, followed by Jumanji: The Next Level. That movie has done really, really well, not just on VOD, but just on home video. Well, they're not selling any videos, but they're definitely selling Blu-rays and everything else. Jumanji: The Next Level has done well. Then we have Emma, The Gentleman, Bloodshot, Bad Boys for Life, Sonic the Hedgehog, all 2020 releases. And then Midway and Fury there at number 8 and number 10. Birds of Prey there at number 9, another 2020 release. But Midway and Fury, if you're looking at the chart and wondering why those two films may be there, a large part of it is that, as I mentioned, we are in the midst of the Memorial Day weekend here in the United States. Those are both military-themed films, so it's very common to see, in the way that we see Christmas films bump up around Christmas and Halloween films bump up around Halloween. Veterans Day, Memorial Day, oftentimes you see films with a military theme or subject matter getting increased interest, so that's probably a likely reason why you're seeing those two films in the top 10 on iTunes. Now let's head over to Amazon. Now, Amazon reports their stuff a little bit differently because their video marketplace does differentiate between rental and purchase. purchase. And over on Amazon, spots 1 and 2 are both taken by Scoob, and that provides a little bit of a hint of what kind of business Scoob is doing. Warner Brothers actually has not, as of this moment, reported anything as far as Scoob's performance, which is surprising a lot of people because there have been estimates that it may have been doing better in its first couple weeks than Trolls World Tour did. And Universal obviously started its whole feud with AMC, really started as they were touting the performance of Trolls World Tour. Scoob takes number 1 and number 2 on the Amazon list. That means one of them is the rental, one of them is the purchase. Now, we don't know which is which, and we don't know, they don't report how many of each of those there are. But the fact that Scoob is topping the top 2 slots on Amazon right now, 2 weeks after its release, coming up on at least, is probably a good indication of how that film is doing. You followed Scoob at 1 and 2 with Trolls World Tour, Bloodshot, The Hurt Locker, another film with a military theme that Amazon is offering as a $2 rental currently. Then you have The Greatest Showman, Sonic, Bad Boys for Life, The Gentleman, and Knives Out there at number 10. Now, Knives Out is another film, if you look at the different charts, if you look on iTunes and elsewhere where you can see sales and rentals, Knives Out is a film that reportedly has been doing very well during quarantine. It is a movie that a lot of people have been returning to, have been renting, a big hit at the end of last year, and probably doing very good numbers on the VOD market as people are seeking out films to watch. So Knives Out making the top 10 on Amazon. Then we go over to Netflix, which of course is not, you're not paying to rent something, it's just the films that are available on the service. And a movie that was due to be released in April from Paramount, it had its release date pulled and was sold to Netflix, is The Lovebirds, starring Issa Rae and Kumail Nanjiani. I did a review for that film right here on the channel. There's a little card that you can click if you want to check that out. The Lovebirds holds the top slot on Netflix as of today. Of course, Netflix changes these rankings daily. It's based on what people are watching today. But right now, The Lovebirds is the most watched film on Netflix, followed by The Wrong Missy. Now, I had never heard of this film, but it made a lot of sense when I looked up exactly what it was. Happy Madison, Adam Sandler's production company, has a producing partnership with Netflix. That's why you see so many Adam Sandler films, not things like Uncut Gems, but the ones that he does through his production company. That's why they go to Netflix. The Wrong Missy is a film from Happy Madison that does not star Adam Sandler. He produced the movie. That's at number 2. Then at number 3, you have Just Go With It, which is an Adam Sandler movie. Maybe off of the success of The Wrong Missy, people are auto-playing or jumping over to Just Go With It. It's getting recommended, but it's there at number 3. Then you have Soul Surfer at number 4, Despicable Me at number 5. That has been a mainstay as a lot of families are at home. Probably why Trolls World Tour was doing so well, why they put Scoob out. Despicable Me there at number 5. Public Enemies, which was a box office disappointment with Johnny Depp, the Chicago gangster story. That has actually been doing well in the Netflix charts. That's there at number 6. Then the Netflix original Extraction at number 7. The Willoughbys, another Netflix original there at number 8. Followed by Den of Thieves, Gerard Butler. That's been hanging around for a while in the Netflix top 10. And then Madagascar, Escape to Africa, the number 2. They're taking something from the Fast and the Furious, which we'll talk about here in a second, right there at number 10. So this is the stuff that everybody's watching at home. And as I mentioned, there will be a day, and we don't know yet what that date is, when new films will come out. But I love open-ended countdowns here on this show. And that's why a couple weeks ago, I started the countdown to new movies. Now, at that time, it was the countdown to the release of Christopher Nolan's Tenet on July 17th. And there have been a couple of developments that have happened since I first started that countdown with a question mark. The first one being, there has been a new trailer released for Tenet, and that did not specify a date. It says coming to theaters. The July 17th is gone. Now, this is probably Warner Brothers being very cautious, but there has also been a lot of rumor, a lot of speculation that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that Warner Brothers is going to potentially announce whether Tenet will stay on that July 17th opening date or whether it will move. And if it moves, that could mean big things for every other film that's coming down the schedule. We're talking Wonder Woman and Soul and everything that's been pushed. That could have huge ramifications for that and the movie release schedule in general, because what Warner Brothers reportedly is concerned with, it's not just that some theaters have to be open, it's that in order for them to be fiscally responsible with releasing the movie, not to mention responsible from a health standpoint, they need to have theaters open in the major metropolitan areas. I live in Los Angeles. The LA County is behind the curve as far as things being reopened, even than other counties surrounding us, because we still have high rates of infection. There are still a lot of numbers of cases that are being reported every day. The stated goal is to follow the science, and right now, Los Angeles, as far as theaters opening, that's not even on the horizon. We don't even have restaurants open yet. We have very few stores that are open. There are many other parts of the country and even parts of the state that are way ahead of we are as far as reopening. When you're a studio like Warner Brothers and you want to put a movie out nationwide, if you're looking at a potential situation where movie theaters in Los Angeles are not even partially open, are still completely closed, it's very tough to do the math on that and say it's worth putting a movie out. These are the concerns that Warner Brothers reportedly has. So Tenet is still on its July 17th date as of today when I'm taping this. However, there was another development that makes me adjust this countdown, and it's a film that nobody probably saw coming called Unhinged, starring Russell Crowe. It's a $30 million budgeted film, and it has staked out a release for July the 1st. They have come out and they have publicly said, we are going to be, and these were their words, we are going to be the canary in the coal mine. They have staked a claim and said, we are going to be the first movie to come out. Will theaters be open? How many will be open? We don't know that. Solstice is a new company. This is the first film that they will be distributing. They are partnered up with Ingenious Media. They've previously co-produced films like Blinded by the Light and Life of Pi and Avatar, Carol. So they're a new company. They're looking to make a splash. But right now, July 1st, the Russell Crowe film Unhinged, it does have a stated nationwide theatrical release date of July 1st, which means that it is currently the first new film slated for release. So the countdown to new movies is open-ended as ever, and we are adjusting it to 37 days. I am counting now July 1st. Unhinged is a new film. It will be released nationwide, supposedly. So 37 days will be the first day that we can supposedly say that we have a new movie in theaters. There's a lot of what ifs and who knows is between then, but that's why there's a question mark right there in the countdown title. So this is Memorial Day weekend, and I decided to flash back to a record-setting Memorial Day weekend. Let's go back to 1997, which was the opening weekend of The Lost World Jurassic Park. Now, it set a record for a 3-day opening that weekend, just over $70 million. And I know it's weird to hear now that a $70 million opening was a record opening weekend, but you take inflation into account and the fact that we have way more theaters and way more screens now than we did back then. $70 million was pretty impressive. It did $90 million over the 4-day weekend. That was, of course, a Memorial Day record, as was the opening weekend record. And then that's a very 90s rest of that top 5. You see a Matthew Broderick, Meg Ryan rom-com there at number 2, Addicted to Love. Then The Fifth Element, which was in the middle of a disappointing box office run with Bruce Willis, of course. Then you have Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, another film that really was not a huge success box office-wise, but caught on when it hit video, and then its sequels were far more successful financially. And then there at number 5, you have Breakdown, starring Kurt Russell, Kathleen Quinlan, and J.T. Walsh, which if you've not seen Breakdown, I think that's actually a really solid movie. It was overlooked by a lot of people when it came out, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it now. It's got shades of Hitchcock. It's a really good action movie. If you like J.T. Walsh, who was a fantastic character actor who passed away, sadly, not too long after the movie came out, he is fantastic in that film as well. So if you've gone through all the usual suspects and you want to find an overlooked film to watch, I would recommend Breakdown. It was number 5 at that record-breaking weekend back in 1997. So we've looked back, but I also want to look sideways. Let's look at an alternate reality, because in a time where this didn't happen, we would be basking in the glow of F9, I guess is what it's called, Fast and Furious 9, Fast of the 9 Furious, Furious 9 Fast, whatever they would have ended up calling it. We're going to call it F9 because that's what they put on the posters. That was slated to have opened this weekend, Memorial Day weekend. So I decided to do, as I always do, let's just do a little experimentation and see, do we think that Fast 9, F9, would have broken any Memorial Day weekend records if it had come out this weekend? Well, first of all, let's look at what the Memorial Day records are. Here's the top 5, and these are not adjusted for inflation because, of course, F9 wouldn't need to break an inflation-adjusted number to make this list. It would have to just beat one of these things. That's why Aladdin is there at number 5. If you adjust for inflation, Aladdin is not one of the 5 best performing Memorial Day weekend movies, but that's the number that F9 would have to beat, right around $116 million. So do we think that F9, Fast 9, whatever you want to call it, would have done that kind of business? Well, let's look at Fast and the Furious movies and what they have done traditionally since their inception. Now, these are adjusted for inflation because I did want to sort of put these somewhat on an equal ground. So as you can see, really where you have to judge the interest for these movies is Fast 5. Fast 5 was really where you introduced The Rock. That's where we hit the tone that the films have kept up until now. And the films have held pretty steady if you look at the inflation-adjusted numbers from Fast 5 to Fate of the Furious. I'm accepting Furious 7. Obviously, you see that that's a big bump in the trend because there were some tragic real-world issues that were mixed in that I think drove a lot of interest to that film specifically. But if you look at Fast 5, 6, and 8, the opening weekends have been pretty consistent between $97 and $107 million over 3 days. Now, we also have some anecdotal evidence, which is that there was one Fast and the Furious movie that did open on Memorial Day weekend. As a matter of fact, you just saw it on that list. Fast and Furious 6 grossed $117 million over Memorial Day weekend back in 2013. And that's roughly where Fast 9 would need to hit this weekend if it were to have come out over the 4-day weekend. I think looking at the numbers and looking at what the other films have done, looking at the range of openings, I think it would have been in the ballpark. It most definitely would have been in the ballpark unless there was a substantial drop in interest in the film. But would it have gotten to that point to where it is in that number 5 spot where it bumps off Aladdin from last year? Well, I think you need to look at what Fast and the Furious 6 was up against versus what this movie would have been up against. Fast and Furious 6 actually fended off a lot of very healthy competition to set that record back in 2013 over Memorial Day weekend. Not only you had The Hangover Part 3, which most people had said might dominate that weekend, was not well received. Fast and Furious 6 easily dominated Hangover Part 3. Epic, an animated film, it beat easily. Then you had some pretty strong holdovers. You had Iron Man 3 from earlier in May. You had Star Trek Into Darkness. You had The Great Gatsby. So when you're looking at the competition level, what F9 would have had to deal with, presumably, there's always things that pop up out of nowhere. The residuals of Black Widow, obviously, as I mentioned, Scoob would have just come out. Spiral from the Book of Saw would have just come out. But I would say that Fast and Furious 6 probably would have had stronger competition to deal with than Fast 9. So I think you can give Fast 9 the edge and say it's maybe a little more likely that it would have jumped up into the top, into that area where Fast and Furious 6 did if it had opened, because the competition was a little weaker than what Fast and Furious 6 had to face. However, some of the intangibles you have to look at as well. Fast and Furious 6 was coming off of Fast 5, which was a very buzzy movie. Fate of the Furious didn't quite hit those highs for a lot of folks. You look at what Hobbs and Shaw did. Fast 9 would not have drafted off of what Hobbs and Shaw did last summer. That movie was a success, but it wasn't the kind of overwhelming success that draws the next film in the franchise into its gravity and boosts it up at the box office. You also have to look at the fact that it doesn't have The Rock, F9. A lot of it comes down to a judgment call. And like I said, I think it would be pretty close with Fast 9, especially when you look at the competition that Fast and Furious 6 had at the same time of year. If I was going to guess, and we'll never know this for sure, if I was going to guess, I would say that Fast 9 probably would have come close to the top 5, but I don't know if it would have made it. I'm going to say that maybe the downward trend would have continued just a little bit from Fate of the Furious, that not having The Rock would have hurt it, would have offset a lot of the things that were working in its favor. So looking at the other films, looking at the other movies and where they've broken down, I think that it would have been close. I think it probably would have been a successful opening for Fast 9, and globally, I think it would have blown the doors off the place. I think that Universal would be very happy this weekend to see what the film had done globally, but I don't know if Fast 9 would have cracked that top 5. I certainly don't think it would have set the all-time record for Memorial Day, unless they made the best movie ever, which we won't know. We won't know until next year when the movie finally hits theaters, we hope. The numbers say that it would have been very close. The numbers say that it definitely had a shot. My gut says no, but I think it's just as likely, especially if the movie really did crush it and hit all the buttons, and if things we don't know, for example, if Black Widow was a disappointment box office wise or critically, if the fans were thirsting for that first big summer blockbuster, if they were looking to scratch that itch that maybe Black Widow didn't scratch, which we don't know, then it's possible that it could have done it. But my gut says no, but it would have been close. Maybe we'll find out an approximate answer when F9 comes out, but like that's the weird thing, and that's why there's always going to be asterisks and what ifs and questions with every hit and every flop from here on out for movies that were scheduled to come out at certain dates. Is how would it have performed if it had been released at a different time and under different circumstances? We're going to be asking these questions at a scale that I don't think I've ever really seen before, but it's going to be part of the box office picture as we're looking at movies going forward. So I mentioned that I like to do countdowns. There is another countdown to adjust, and that is another countdown with a question in it. The countdown to New Mutants. This is something that I started a while ago, and it looks like it's going to go on forever, because New Mutants has been given its new release date. This is its 5th official release date. 5th release date. That's insane. August 28th, 2020 is the new release date for New Mutants. They are very committed to getting this movie out in theaters. Now, I've often speculated about it going to streaming services, overlooking the fact that there has been reporting done that there could be if there are contractual issues with the X-Men franchise, with pre-existing deals, that the movies cannot go straight to streaming. So this may be why we're seeing the film just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to theatrical release dates, because there are pre-existing contractual issues, which even I had forgotten about, that could exist. But right now, August 28th, 2020 is the new release date for the New Mutants, which means that we are 95 short days from the release of New Mutants in theaters nationwide. By the time we get there, if we get there, 3 of its original release dates will have passed by a year or more. So we are just a shade under 3 months away from New Mutants supposedly being released into theaters. It was questionable if this movie was going to come out under normal circumstances. Even more questionable now. We could be looking at a 6th release date or a 7th release date. I think we just keep punting it 6 months down. Just every 3 months, let's just keep punting it and just see how far we can go. Let's go into the 2030s. Let's see if we can get a decade. Let's get like quintuple digits on these release dates that have passed, because at this point, I think it only enhances the chances of a box office success, because people just get more and more curious with every release date that goes by. So 95 short days away from countdown from the New Mutants. Maybe not. We'll see. So those are the charts. That's the box office news that I've got for you today. What do you think? Are you looking forward to studios reporting numbers again? Do you want to see what movies have done in the weeks and months since they officially stopped reporting box office numbers? What do you think about Fast 9? Do you think that it would have hit that milestone? Do you think it would have been one of the best Memorial Day releases? Or do you think it might have fallen short? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all that fun stuff. And if you want to go even deeper into all of these movies and all the fun stuff that we're doing here, you can check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We're doing the monthly movie club. This week's theme, which we're going to be releasing the breakdown video of this week for, was Defining Dan. Movies that defined me, movies that had a huge influence on me. This was a theme that was chosen by my patrons. They choose the theme every month. We're actually in the process of choosing next month's theme. I'm excited to talk about these movies because the 4 that I picked were the first movie that I ever saw, which is An American Tail, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which is Star Trek obviously is a big thing for me. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the movie that really got me interested into the technical details of filmmaking, and also just a really, really good movie. And E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the movie that really hooked me into Steven Spielberg, that got me entranced in the magic of cinema. Those are the 4 movies that we're going to be discussing this week. There are already a lot of great suggestions for what we're going to do in June. Also, at the producer level, you get a monthly movie commentary. I just did one for Jurassic Park, which was so much fun, and it's been exciting to talk to people about that. We're going to start the process of choosing that commentary for June again, so I'll be doing another feature-length commentary. Go check all that out and more on Patreon. We'd love to have you over there. And I love having you here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully there will be even more box office news next week. If not, we'll just make some stuff up. It's jazz at this point. It's just all improv. I'm going to yes and the box office next week, and hope you'll join me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.